drawing an important distinction for us as we continue on this journey of talking about trust. There's a very important factor that we have to identify when we begin to talk about trust. Something that kind of has everything to do with our trust in the Lord, and honestly, our trust in every relationship that we have. And that is, simply stated, how much risk is present. In other words, it's real easy to trust when we have nothing to lose, right? It's real easy to trust if you have nothing to lose. And so knowing that when we begin on this journey and talking about trust and trusting the Lord and what that looks like, we have to understand that it's trust when there are things at stake, when we feel like everything is at stake. You see, you could, if you didn't know any better, you could drive by a car and it could have student driver written all over it, huge letters, side, front, hood, back, top. It's the way they should be. And you could look in and you could see someone driving that to you, our age dies, they look 10 years old, but they're probably 15. And then there's a middle-aged man riding shotgun with a clipboard in his hand. And they're going along. And you might, if you didn't know any better, you might ask the question, how crazy is this guy to trust his life in the hands of that 10-year-old who's driving? But what you don't see, right, and what all of us in here who went through some kind of driver's ed probably know, what you don't see is he has a panic button, right? He's got a panic button, this under the dash over there on his side. I honestly Googled those when my oldest began driving. I was like, okay, how much does it cost? Is it a permanent install? What does that look like? But he's got this brake over there that he can hit anytime he wants. It looks like trust, right? If you don't know that that's down there and you're driving by, man, this guy. But down underneath that dash, you see that it's really not. There's more to it. He has a safety net there. We said this last week. Trusting God requires surrender. Trusting God requires surrender. That's not the appearance of surrender. Somebody who might know you, or maybe somebody else in this room who might look at your life from afar, or at least from outside of the walls of your own home and say, man, they trust the Lord. But true surrender, not the appearance, but the total surrender of control, and especially when we have something or everything to lose. Total surrender of control. You see, in 1 Samuel chapter 13, I want to tell you the story of what's going on here and maybe give you a little bit of background, as last week we started back into 1 Samuel, but it had been a few months since we were here. And so to get you back into this story, essentially, Israel is not trusting God. Israel, the people of Israel, this nation, they're not trusting God. They've rejected God as their king. They've requested a king, and their rationale, their reasoning is, we want a king so that we can be like all the other nations. They've looked around and they've seen these other nations and how they function, and they've attached to that this perception of success and victory and security and comfort, and they said, we want that, and they have that, at least from our point of view, the nation of Israel. So we want a king to be just like them. And so they take the road that everyone else is on. Last Sunday in chapter 12, we saw that Samuel got up and he reminded them, this incredibly awkward moment. I would love to really and truly know how this played out. But in my mind, and as you read chapter 12, Samuel stands up and it said, in front of all of Israel, he's there and he's communicating to them, all this nation of Israel, and he's reminding them of God's faithfulness. Here's all God has done. The God, your father, he delivered you from slavery in Egypt. Oh yeah, remember, he's the one that parted the Red Sea. Here's the faithfulness of our God, everything that he's done. And here's the man, apparently Saul's right there, that you've chosen to place your trust in. Here's the future. Samuel takes them through this journey. And by placing God's work next to their request of Saul, based on the perception of what they saw in these other nations, Samuel stands before them and calls for a renewal of their trust. He asks them, come on, guys. Trust the Lord. Look at what he's done. Look at your story. Look at your history. Look at who he is. Trust the Lord. And so the last verses in chapter 12, leading into our chapter today in 13, Samuel says, only fear the Lord. This is chapter 12, verse 24. Only fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. For consider what great things he has done for you. You hear that in Samuel's plea? Remember God. Remember all he's done. And then the last verse, 25, he said, but if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king. And so Samuel calls them to a renewal of trust. He says, it's not too late, guys. Yeah, you've messed up. You've made mistakes, but it's not too late. And then we get to chapter 13. And a significant amount of time has passed here. We don't know exactly how long, but likely maybe 2 years have passed. This time has passed. Saul is king. And to Saul's credit, he's done, it's on chapter 11, he's removed the Ammonite threat. But Saul's primary mission, given by God through Samuel, when he became king, primary mission was to deal with the Philistines. He's going to deal with the Philistines. That was his mission, his objective. And here we are years later, and he's done nothing about it. You see, I'm sure the people of Israel, it's like our first 100 days of a president. There's things in their platform, right? When they're running the whole time and they're giving all their speeches and what they're about. There's some things that you expect to happen quickly. For Saul, dealing with the Philistines. That's what the people of Israel said. We want a king, and one of the motivations was, we've got this Philistine army that's threatening us. And God places him there and he says, your objective, the Philistines. So, to understand how chapter 13 unfolds, two important things we need to remember. First is just that, what we said. Saul was told to attack the Philistine encampment at Gibeah. That was back in chapter 10. But the second thing is Saul was told to go down. I know these places mean nothing to you, but it's important. Go home today, look at a map, find these spots. Second, Saul was then told to go down to Gilgal and wait for Samuel there. Both of those two commands happen in chapter 10, verse 7 and 8. A surprising turn of events takes place. We read about it in verse 3 of chapter 13. Jonathan, who was Saul's son, Saul's oldest son, he ends up defeating that Philistine encampment at Gibeah. It's interesting. How does King Saul respond? What does Saul do? Here's the man who was placed king, this people, the nation of Israel. We want a king. Oh yeah, that's the one. We thank you. We've got the king we want. Now we need the king to defeat all of our opponents like we see these other amazing nations do when they get a king. Saul's son defeats that encampment. And in verse 4 of chapter 13 it says, "And all Israel heard it said that Saul had defeated the garrison of the Philistines." So what did Saul do? He told everybody that he did it. He told everybody that he had done it. So you can imagine, here's this Philistine army. They had been attacked, this one little outpost. Saul's son, Jonathan, goes out and he defeats this little outpost. This is a small representation of an enormous, mighty army. And so after that defeat right there, you can imagine the Philistines are going to get angry. And they do. And they get very angry. You've heard the phrase, "don't poke the bear," right? One of our children, I won't name her by name, but I've just narrowed it down to two. If she woke up in the morning or after nap time on her own, everything was glorious. But if we had to wake her up, either in the morning or after nap time, everyone was going to pay. Everyone was going to pay. You literally poked the bear, and you did not want to poke the bear. I mean, as parents, you would do, looking back now, it sounds so crazy, but those of you and your parents, you totally understand. You kind of organize your schedule or your day around these kind of realities. What do we need to do today? Okay, well, let's wait because she may not wake up until 3, so we don't want to wake her up and go do that before 3. The Philistines are the bear here. And the bear has been poked. They're angry. They're angry at the people of Israel. They're angry at Saul. And so what happens here? Saul begins moving away from where the Philistine army is towards Gilgal. That's the same place in chapter 12 where Samuel stood up before the people, called for the renewal of their trust. But more importantly, that is the place where Samuel had told Saul to wait for him once a battle against the Philistine army became imminent. Let me read to you those words. This was back in chapter 10, verse 8. Incredibly important for the way that we understand what happens in chapter 13. The words are, "Go down before me," Samuel talking to Saul, "go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I am coming down to you to offer burnt offerings and to sacrifice peace offerings." Here's the important part. 7 days you shall wait until I come to you and show you what you shall do. So the instructions that he's given. Go down there, wait for me. Two things. 7 days you shall wait until I come to you and show you what you shall do. Parenting in our current text message culture is a mixed bag. There's some good and not so good. Okay, the not so good, as all of us know in this room, is that anyone, especially those of younger ages, are more quick to text something than they are to actually say it, right? Even those of us who are adults, we are too oftentimes. We'll oftentimes send something via text message that maybe we would never say face to face. It's dangerous. But there's also a good thing about parenting in this text message culture. You see, when the rest of us were growing up and there wasn't text messaging, you had some little manipulation techniques that you could play around with. If you got home and your parents, I didn't do any of this, but maybe some of you did, and your parents got upset with you, told you to be home at 7. Oh, I heard you say 11. And you could play these games around what you heard or what they said or misunderstanding, but you can't do that anymore because you can send a text message. You said, I sent you, look, right here on your phone, be home at 7. There's no way to misunderstand that. Some of the benefits you and I have as parents. Well, Saul takes that approach here of manipulating the situation, working the situation out in a way that favors him, and honestly favors and displays his lack of trust. 7 days you shall wait until I come to you and show you what you shall do. 2 important commands there. 1 is we have to wait 7 days, but 2, wait until I show you what to do. Those are very clear. Very clear. See, most historians believe that Samuel shows up late on day 7. But some historians, the minority, believe it was day 8 before Samuel showed up. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it was day 7 or day 8 when Samuel showed up, because what were the instructions given? Wait until I show you. Wait 7 days and wait until I show you. So Saul is waiting. He's waiting there, and the people of Israel are running away scared. His army, his people, running away in fear. They had poked the bear. The bear is growing, fortifying day after day. Saul's there and he's waiting, and this Philistine army, they're just having time to gather more supplies, sharpen their weapons. Everybody is scared. And Saul has everything to lose. Everything to lose. This is the mission that he was given as king. His trust becomes evident here as he hits his panic button. You see, he decides on day 7 that he's done waiting. King Saul decides on day 7 that he's done waiting. He offers the burnt offering himself. And then I want to read to you in verse 10 what happens. What happens the moment that he finishes. It says, chapter 13, verse 10, as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. Saul went out to meet him and greet him. Samuel said, what have you done? In verse 13, it says, Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God with which he commanded you, for the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever, but now your kingdom shall not continue. Did you catch that? The end of verse 13? The Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. Let's make an observation here of the story that we just saw play out. God called Saul to trust him after all his safety nets had expired. In other words, God wanted Saul's trust even when his own people were running away. God wanted Saul to trust him. God wanted Saul's trust even when the Philistine army was growing stronger and stronger. They were sharpening their weapons. They were gathering strength. God wanted Saul to trust him. God wanted Saul's trust after all of the safety nets had expired. I've never been rock climbing on anything that wasn't man-made. But I'm kind of a fan. I guess that makes me what we used to call a poser. because I like watching it. I like the pictures because beautiful pictures of rock climbing, but I've never been on the side of a real mountain, just these places, that we have around here. And I enjoy watching documentaries about climbing, again, really because of the amazing geography. I recently watched one that I know probably some of you in this room have seen, and it's a documentary that follows a climber's journey to climb El Capitan in June of 2017. And it follows his journey, and this, if you're unfamiliar, this is a summit that's about 3,000 feet high in Yosemite National Park. And so this documentary follows him and his journey and his climb. But here's the thing, there's a lot of other people who have made that climb before. So if you haven't seen it, maybe you're wondering, well, why does he get a documentary? He gets a documentary because he makes that 3,000-foot climb with no carabiners, no ropes, no safety nets, nothing at all except for him on the wall of that mountain alone. Therefore, the title, Free Solo, of the documentary. Free Solo. He's up there by himself, free from any kind of safety and cable, alone. His name is Alex. He was prepared, if you can be prepared. He had a lot of experience. The documentary walks through all of his experience as a climber. He had done all this research, which was impressive. He was an expert. But here's the thing. He fully trusted his own ability and control over everything else. I mean, if we were mixed metaphors here, we were gymnastics or ice skating, the only time I watch it's during the Olympics. And you give them the score, right? 9 point, whatever. You'd have to give Alex here a 10 out of 10 in self-confidence, right? He believes in his ability above and beyond everything else. He literally stakes his life upon it. You see, watching that documentary, in my mind, it's one of the greatest displays to me of how capable we are of trusting our own control over everything else. How capable that you and I are of trusting our own control, ourselves, above and beyond anything else. You see, I'm not an expert, but I look at what he did, and I personally think he's insane. Insane. Why, Matt? Why would you say that? Well, there's two things I know for sure out of dozens of reasons I could give. Number one, I have never seen gravity fail. Number two, I've never seen anyone fall from high places and be okay. Those two reasons are good enough. But Alex here had gotten himself to a place where he was so confident in himself and his ability that none of that mattered. He was so confident in himself and his ability that reason and the logic didn't matter. He believed in his own control above and beyond anything else. This moment that we just talked about in chapter 13 of 1 Samuel, it's really not that different. It's really not that different. You see, Saul's army here was literally running away. As the Philistines, they grew stronger. His army literally running away. He's there and he's waited. He's waited and they've had all of this time to get stronger and sharpen their weapons. You see, Saul was outmanned, outgunned, whatever the equivalent is, back outspeared, whatever, before they even began strengthening. But here we are at day 7. Here we are at day 7, with his army scattered, the Philistine army, stronger than they've ever been before. And Saul says, okay, let's do this. I can take them. All 30,000 of them. I can do it. Saul has more trust in his own self-control, his own ability, than the promise of God that was given to him in this moment. And it makes no sense whatsoever. Everything is stacked against Saul. Bigger and badder army, his own army weakened. He still believes as long as he's in control, he's got a chance. You and I do this constantly with our God. You and I do this constantly. Let me ask you a question. How many times have the promises of God failed? How many times? How many times have the promises of God failed? And here's what I'm not asking you this morning. I'm not asking you how many times did God work things out differently than you expected. That's not the question. I'm not asking you how many times did God work something out in a way that maybe you didn't prefer. The question is, how many times have the promises of God failed? Or ask maybe in another way, how many times has God not followed through on the promises of his word? The answer is never. Never. Not once. Never. Never. Just as sure as I know what comes up must come down, I know that what God says will happen, will happen. God's promises never fail. God's promises never fail. We use a word when we talk about God and the way that he works, and it's a word that we often don't use in everyday conversation, and it's the word infallible. God is infallible. Let me break that word down for you for just a minute, since it's not a word we use in everyday conversation. God is infallible, which means he's incapable of making mistakes. That's our God. Incapable of making mistakes. It means that he's never failing. That's our God. Never failing. Here's my favorite gloss in the dictionary of the word infallible. Absolutely trustworthy. Absolutely trustworthy. Our God is infallible. Our God is absolutely trustworthy. And yet, time and time again, you and I, as we're journeying through life, we don't trust him. We have more trust in our own ability, our own control than we do anything and everything else. All the while, the God, the creator of the universe, the only infallible God who is absolutely trustworthy, has given us a book full of promises, and yet we hold on as tight as we can, believing in our strength, our control, our ability. Here's my favorite part of the story in chapter 13. It's back in verse 10. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. That behold moment is where trust happens. That behold moment. You notice what's going on there? Immediately after he did it, behold, Samuel came. That's what God is waiting on. That's what God is waiting on in our lives. Trust sits just beyond our final opportunity to take control. That's where trust is. Just on the other side of our final opportunity to take control. If you've got a worship guide this morning, the last statement. Trusting God takes us beyond safety nets and comfort zones and into stories of exceeded expectations. See, here's the beauty of trusting our God. There's some situations in life that you might be able to navigate with your control in a satisfactory way. But when we begin to trust in God, and we begin to get into those behold moments, just past every safety net, just past all of the areas where we can grasp for our own control, that's the moment when God begins to work in ways that exceed our expectations. He begins to work in ways that we could never understand, imagine, or expect, because he's working, and his work is greater than anything we could ever do, expect, and especially control. So today, if you're here, whether it's the big things in life, maybe marriage or school, parenting, career, trust the Lord. Trust the Lord. Believe and affirm that what he can and will do based on the promises of this book are far greater than anything that you could ever control. And trust begins just beyond that last opportunity that you have to do things your way. I want to invite you to bow your head and close your eyes. And as we respond this morning, we're not going to celebrate communion as we do nearly every other week. I'm just going to invite you this morning to respond to the Lord, and I just have to believe that in every one of our lives there are areas where he's calling us to trust, and yet our knuckles are turning white because we're holding on so hard. Choices about school for your kids, choices about jobs, whatever it is. Would you spend some time this morning in the presence of our infallible God and just lay it over to him in trust? Trust. Surrender. Father, we love you, and God, we are so blessed, so thankful, overwhelmed by the reality that we can trust you. We can surrender. We can be out of control, all the while resting in the greatest place that anybody could ever be, which is sitting right in the middle of your will. God, would you give us that kind of faith? Would you give us that kind of trust to surrender control? Father, even when the things don't make sense around us, maybe when the dollars don't add up, opportunities don't make sense, the times when maybe there's no opportunities there, God, help us to trust you in your ways, because we need you. Father, I ask this morning, if there's anybody in this room who hasn't placed their faith in you, they haven't trusted you with the greatest thing, biggest trust that anybody could ever display, is just literally when we give our lives to you. We trust you with our life by believing in you, by faith. God, I ask that you would open eyes to faith this morning. Maybe some that have never had the opportunity to trust you because they don't have a relationship with you. God, I ask that you would move, giving them courage and strength to be able to ask someone around them, that they would want to know more, that they would come up to the front, that they would pray, that they would pursue this gift that we have in you, to be able to trust you, our infallible God, because you are absolutely trustworthy. Father, work in our hearts.